Some memories feel like faded photographs, soft around the edges, warm in color, but carrying a quiet sadness that you only understand years later. My name is Ananya, and for most of my life, I felt like the extra chair at my own family's table. Not unwanted exactly, just unnecessary. Growing up, there were four of us in our small house: my mother, my father, my younger brother, Arav, and me. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. My father was respected in our neighborhood, my mother was known for her kindness, Arav was charming, loud, and full of life. And me? I was the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background, the one people forgot to ask about. I noticed the difference very early. When Arav was born, I was 6 years old enough to remember how things used to be. Before him, my mother used to brush my hair every morning before school. She would hum soft songs while tying my braids, and sometimes she would kiss the top of my head. "Ananya," she would say, "you are my sunshine." But after Arav arrived, everything changed slowly, like winter creeping into autumn. The songs stopped, the braids became quick and messy, and eventually, even the morning kisses disappeared. Arav became the center of the house. If he laughed, everyone laughed. If he cried, the entire world stopped. If he wanted something, he got it. New toys, better clothes, the bigger bedroom when we moved houses. Meanwhile, I learned something children should never have to learn: how to make myself smaller. I stopped asking for things, stopped complaining, stopped expecting love to come my way. I remember one particular afternoon when I was 9. My school had organized a small art competition. I had spent weeks painting a picture of a sunrise over a lake. The colors were bright and hopeful, and my teacher loved it so much she entered it into the district competition. When the results came, I had won second place in the entire district. I ran home that day, holding the certificate tightly so the wind wouldn't wrinkle it. My heart was pounding with excitement. For once, I thought, maybe today they'll notice me. When I reached home, my mother was sitting in the living room with Arav. He was crying. "What happened?" I asked softly. "Arav didn't make the cricket team," my mother said, her voice full of sympathy. I stood there quietly, my certificate trembling in my hands. "Oh," I said. No one asked about my day. No one noticed the certificate. After a few minutes, my mother looked at me. "Ananya, can you make tea for your brother? He's upset." I remember standing in the kitchen later, staring at the kettle as tears blurred my vision. My certificate stayed folded inside my bag for days. Eventually, I slipped it under my mattress. It wasn't that my parents were cruel. They never yelled at me without reason. They paid for my school, they fed me, clothed me, and made sure I had what I needed. But love, the kind that feels warm and visible, that always seemed reserved for Arav. As we grew older, the gap widened. When Arav turned 16, my parents threw him a huge birthday party. Lights, music, cake, dozens of relatives. When I turned 16 2 years earlier, my birthday had been a quiet dinner at home. My mother had forgotten to buy a cake until the evening. "Next year we'll celebrate properly," she had promised. Next year never came. But despite everything, I loved my brother. Arav wasn't responsible for the favoritism. He had simply grown up in a world where he was adored. Sometimes he would sit in my room late at night and tell me about his dreams: becoming a professional athlete, traveling the world, buying a big house for our parents. And I would smile, because his happiness felt like sunlight in our quiet home. Still, deep inside, there was always a question I never dared to ask. Why? Why did my parents look at him with pride, but at me with something distant, something careful, something that felt almost like guilt? The truth began to unravel the year I turned 24. It started with something small, something ordinary, something that seemed completely unrelated to me. A hospital visit, a routine medical test, and a doctor who frowned at a piece of paper. That was the day everything changed. That was the day the first crack appeared in the story of my family, and none of us were ready for what would come next. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and quiet worry. It was the kind of place where people spoke in softer voices, where footsteps echoed along white floors, and where time seemed to move slower than anywhere else. That morning, the visit wasn't even about me. It was about Arav. He had been feeling tired for weeks, strangely tired for someone who had always been full of energy. He complained about dizziness, headaches, and sometimes his nose would bleed without warning. At first, my parents dismissed it. "You're just stressed," my father told him. But when he fainted during a cricket practice, everything changed. The doctor insisted on a full medical checkup. Blood tests, scans, more tests, and somehow, because I was the responsible older sister who always handled things quietly, I ended up being the one who accompanied Arav to the hospital that day. He sat beside me in the waiting room, tapping his foot nervously. "Relax," I said gently. "You're the one who's calm about everything," he muttered. "How do you do that?" I smiled faintly. "When you grow up being the quiet one," I told him, "you learn how to wait." He laughed softly, but there was worry in his eyes. A nurse finally called his name, Arav Sharma. We followed her into a small office where a middle-aged doctor sat behind a desk filled with files. He studied Arav's test reports carefully. His expression slowly changed. First, concentration, then confusion, then something heavier. He looked up at us. "Arav," he said carefully, "I need to ask you a few questions." Arav nodded. The doctor spoke slowly. "Your blood results show something unusual. It's not dangerous right now, but it suggests you might have a genetic blood disorder." Arav blinked. "Genetic?" "Yes, it usually runs in families." The doctor leaned back in his chair. "I would like to test your parents as well." That evening, when we told our parents, the reactions surprised me. My mother's face went pale. Not worried, pale. My father looked equally unsettled. "Genetic?" he repeated slowly. "Yes," Arav said. "The doctor wants to test both of you." For a moment, the room felt strangely silent. Then my mother forced a smile. "Of course," she said quickly, "we'll do the tests." But something in her voice sounded tight, like a violin string pulled too hard. A week later, we were all back at the hospital. The same white walls, the same quiet hallways, but this time the tension felt heavier. The doctor called my parents into his office first. Arav and I waited outside. He scrolled through his phone while I watched the door. 10 minutes passed, 20, 30. Finally, the door opened. My parents stepped out, and I noticed something immediately. My mother had been crying. We were all called inside. The doctor cleared his throat. "There seems to be a discrepancy." My father frowned. "What do you mean?" The doctor turned his computer screen towards us. "The genetic markers don't match." Arav looked confused. "What does that mean?" The doctor hesitated. Then he spoke carefully. "It means Arav did not inherit this condition from either of his parents." Silence filled the room. My father shook his head. "That's impossible." The doctor nodded slowly. "There is another explanation." Everyone held their breath. "The test suggests Arav is not biologically related to one of his parents." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. My heart began to race. Arav laughed nervously. "This must be a mistake." The doctor looked serious. "These tests are extremely accurate." My mother suddenly stood up. "We're leaving." Her voice trembled. But before we could move, the doctor said something that changed everything. "There's one more thing." We stopped. He looked directly at me. "Ananya, we should test you as well." I blinked in surprise. "Why me?" "Because," the doctor said quietly, "if there has been a mix-up or hidden genetic issue in the family, testing all siblings can help clarify the situation." My parents exchanged a quick look, a look that lasted only a second, but in that second, something deep inside me stirred. A
a quiet voice whispering, "Something isn't right." 2 days later, I gave my blood sample. It seemed like a small, simple thing, just a tiny vial of dark red liquid. But sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest truths. The results came back faster than expected, and when the doctor called us in again, his face was more serious than before. He placed 2 reports on the desk. Then he looked at my parents. "You should prepare yourselves." My stomach tightened, because in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was about to discover who I really was.
I remember every tiny detail of that room. The pale green walls, the quiet hum of the air conditioner, the sound of papers sliding across the doctor's desk. Sometimes life changes in loud, dramatic moments, but sometimes it changes in silence. The doctor folded his hands and looked at my parents first. "Before I explain these reports," he said gently, "I want to confirm something." My father nodded stiffly. "Yes?" "Ananya and Arav are both your biological children, correct?" My father answered immediately, "Of course they are." But my mother didn't say anything. She just stared at the floor. And suddenly, my heart started beating faster. The doctor slowly turned the first report toward us. "This test confirms that Arav is the biological son of both of you." Arav let out a small laugh of relief. "See?" he said. "I told you it was probably nothing." But the doctor didn't smile. Instead, he pushed the second report forward. This one had my name at the top. My hands began to tremble slightly. "Ananya," the doctor said carefully, "the DNA markers show that you are not biologically related to your mother." The words hit me like cold water. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. "What?" I whispered. The doctor continued quietly. "However, you are biologically related to your father." I stared at him. My mind struggled to process the sentence. My father looked shocked. My brother looked confused. And my mother started crying. "No," my father said suddenly. "This is wrong." But the doctor shook his head. "We ran the test twice to be certain." A heavy silence filled the room. I looked at my mother. "Mom?" My voice felt small, fragile. "Please, tell me what this means." She covered her face with her hands, and for the first time in my life, I saw her break. The truth didn't come all at once. It came slowly, painfully, like someone opening a door that had been locked for decades. My father leaned forward. "Explain it," he demanded. The doctor spoke gently. "The results indicate that Ananya's biological mother is not the woman who raised her." My father turned to my mother. His voice shook. "What is he talking about?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at me. Her eyes were full of something I had never seen before: fear and guilt. "There's something I never told you," she whispered. My father's face turned pale. "What?" She took a deep breath. 25 years ago, when Ananya was born, there was a complication during delivery." I felt like the room was spinning. "What complication?" I asked. My mother's voice cracked. "There was another woman in the same hospital that night." My father frowned. "And?" She closed her eyes. "Our babies were born only minutes apart." The doctor leaned forward, listening carefully. "And then," my mother said quietly, "there was a mix-up." My heart stopped. What kind of mix-up? Her hands trembled. "The nurses switched the babies." The room went completely silent. Arav stared at her. "You're saying Ananya isn't your baby?" My mother shook her head slowly. "No." The word felt like it echoed through my entire body. I suddenly felt cold, very cold. "So," I whispered, "my real mother is someone else?" My mother nodded through tears. "Yes." My father looked stunned. "Why didn't you tell us?" She began crying harder, because by the time we realized the mistake, it was already too late. The doctor looked confused. "What do you mean?" My mother took a shaky breath. "The other baby, the one who was supposed to be ours?" She swallowed.
didn't survive. A deep, heavy silence filled the room. My chest tightened. "So you kept me," I said slowly. She nodded. "Yes." I waited for the next sentence, for the part where she would say something comforting, something loving, but instead she whispered something that explained my entire childhood. "At first, I tried to love you like my own." My throat burned. Tried? Her tears fell faster. "But every time I looked at you, I remembered the daughter I lost." The words cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. Suddenly, everything made sense. The distance, the coldness, the way she looked at me differently than Arav. It wasn't because I had done something wrong. It was because she reminded her of what she had lost. Arav stood up abruptly. "This is insane." He looked at me with wide eyes. "So you're not really my sister?" My voice barely came out. "I guess not." But the doctor raised his hand. "Actually, there's more." We all turned toward him. He pointed at the report again. "Ananya is still biologically related to her father." My father froze. "What?" The doctor nodded. "That means the mix-up may not have been random." The room grew even quieter. "Because," the doctor continued slowly, "the only way this result is possible," he looked directly at my father, "is if Ananya's biological mother was someone he knew." My father's face turned white. My mother gasped. And suddenly, the story of my birth became even more complicated.
For a few seconds, no one spoke. The doctor's words hung in the air like a storm cloud that hadn't yet decided whether to break. My father stared at the report on the table as if it might suddenly disappear. That can't be right," he said quietly. But the doctor remained calm. "The DNA markers are very clear. Ananya shares half of her genetic profile with you, which means you are her biological father." I looked at my father. He looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him before. And something inside me shifted, because suddenly the distance I had always felt in our family wasn't just emotional anymore. It had a story behind it, a complicated one. My mother wiped her eyes slowly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You promised we would never talk about this again." My heart skipped a beat. Talk about what? My father closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. Then he took a deep breath. "It happened before you were born," he said. My chest tightened. "Before I was born?" He nodded slowly. "There was a woman." The words felt sharp in the quiet room. My mother looked away. "I knew about her," she said softly. I stared at her. "You knew?" She nodded, tears forming again. "Yes." The doctor watched silently as the truth unfolded. My father continued. "It was years ago, before Arav, before our lives became stable. I was working long hours in another city." His voice sounded heavy with regret. "I met someone there. Her name was Mira. The name meant nothing to me, but somehow it felt important. She was kind," he continued quietly. "We spent time together, and eventually she told me she was pregnant." My heart pounded harder. "And you left her?" His eyes filled with guilt. "No." He shook his head. "I told her I would take responsibility, but by then my mother had discovered everything." I looked at my mother. Her expression was distant. "I was already pregnant with our baby," she said softly. My breath caught. "So there were 2 pregnancies at the same time?" My father nodded. "Yes." The doctor leaned forward slightly. "That explains the DNA result." My mother continued the story. "The night you were born, Mira was in the same hospital. I felt dizzy. 2 women, 2 babies, 1 hospital room. The nurses made a mistake," she said, "and the babies were switched." "But you said the other baby died," Arav said. My mother nodded slowly. "Yes." My chest tightened. "Was it their baby?" She looked at me. Her eyes were full of sadness. "Yes." The world suddenly felt incredibly quiet. "So the child you lost was the one you were carrying?" She nodded again. "And I was the baby who survived?" "Yes." The truth landed like falling stones. I wasn't just switched at birth. I was the child of the woman my father had once loved, and the woman who raised me had lost her own daughter that same night. No wonder she struggled to love me. No wonder every look carried pain. I represented everything she had lost. Arav ran a hand through his hair. "This is crazy." He looked at me again. "So technically, you're still Dad's daughter." I gave a weak smile. "Half of one, I guess." But the doctor wasn't finished. "There is still one important question," he said. Everyone looked at him. "Where is Mira?" My heart swallowed. "I don't know." My heart jumped. "You never looked for her?" He shook his head slowly. "After the hospital incident, the staff told us her baby had died." I felt a strange ache inside my chest. "So she believes her child died?" "Yes." The doctor leaned back in his chair. "That means she has spent 24 years believing she lost her daughter." My throat tightened. And suddenly a thought appeared in my mind. A powerful, overwhelming thought. Somewhere in the world, there was a woman who believed her child had died, but that child was sitting right here, breathing, alive. My voice trembled. "Can we find her?" My father looked uncertain. "It's been decades." The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "But hospitals keep records." Hope flickered inside my chest. Small, fragile, but real. For the first time in my life, I felt something strange. I wasn't just the quiet girl in the background anymore. I wasn't just the child who had always felt slightly out of place. Somewhere out there was a woman who might look at me and see something different. Not loss, not guilt, not distance, but recognition. My mother suddenly spoke. Her voice was soft but firm. "If you find her, you should meet her." Everyone turned toward her in surprise. Tears rolled down her face. "You deserve to know where you came from." I looked at her carefully, and for the first time, there was no coldness in her eyes, only honesty, and maybe a little bit of peace. But none of us could have imagined what would happen when we finally found Mira, because the truth waiting for us was even more unbelievable than the one we had just discovered. For the next few days, our house felt different, quieter than usual. Not the comfortable quiet I had grown used to over the years, but the kind that sits heavily in the air, like everyone is thinking the same thoughts, but no one knows how to say them out loud. My parents spoke in hushed voices late at night. Arav stayed in his room more than usual. And me? I spent hours staring at the ceiling, wondering about a woman I had never met. Mira, my biological mother. Somewhere out there, she had lived 24 years believing her baby had died the day she was born. The thought made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. 3 days after the hospital meeting, the doctor called. "We found something," he said. My heart started racing immediately. "What?" "The hospital still has old records from that year." I could hear papers shuffling on his desk. "There was only one woman named Mira admitted that night. Her full name was Mira Khanna." I repeated it quietly. Mira Khanna. The name suddenly felt incredibly important. "Do you have an address?" I asked. "Yes," the doctor replied, "but it's an old one." My hands trembled. "That's okay." Because even an old address was more than I had ever had before. The next morning, my father and I drove across the city. The car ride was almost silent. I watched buildings pass outside the window, my mind full of questions. What would she look like? Would she recognize me? Would she be angry? Or worse, would she feel nothing at all? My father finally spoke. "You don't have to do this today." I shook my head. "No, I do." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I've spent my whole life wondering why I felt different. Now I finally know there's someone out there connected to me." He nodded slowly. "You're brave, Ananya." I gave a small smile. For most of my childhood, I had never heard that word used for me. The address led us to a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city. Small houses lined the street, surrounded by trees and flowering plants. It felt peaceful, hopeful.
My heart began pounding harder as we stopped in front of a pale blue house with a small garden in the front yard. Wind chimes hung from the porch. They made a soft, musical sound in the breeze. I stared at the house. "She lives here?" I asked. My father checked the paper again. "Yes." My legs suddenly felt weak. This is really happening. We walked slowly up the path. Every step felt heavier than the last. My father raised his hand and knocked. 3 soft knocks echoed against the wooden door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then we heard footsteps inside. The door opened, and there she was. The woman standing in the doorway looked to be in her late 40s. Her hair was streaked with silver, tied loosely behind her head. Her eyes were warm but curious. But the moment I saw her face, my breath caught, because looking at her felt like looking into a mirror from the future. The same eyes, the same shape of the nose, the same quiet expression. For the first time in my life, I saw someone who looked like me. She studied us politely. "Yes?" My father hesitated. "Are you Mira Khanna?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." My throat suddenly felt dry. I stepped forward. "My name is Ananya." She smiled kindly. "That's a beautiful name." Her voice was gentle, and something about it felt strangely familiar. My father cleared his throat. "May we speak with you for a moment?" She looked slightly puzzled, but stepped aside. "Of course." We entered the house. It smelled faintly of jasmine tea. The living room was simple but cozy. Bookshelves, soft lighting, framed photographs on the walls. My eyes drifted toward one photo frame on a nearby table. It showed a younger version of her holding a tiny baby blanket. The blanket was pink, but there was no baby in the picture. My chest tightened. We sat down. Mira poured tea for us. "You said your name was Ananya?" I asked. I nodded. "Yes." She smiled again. "What brings you here?" My father looked at me, silently asking if I was ready. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. But I knew this moment had to happen. I took a deep breath. "There was a mistake at a hospital 24 years ago." Her smile slowly faded. "What kind of mistake?" I placed the DNA report on the table between us. Her eyes moved across the page. Then they moved to my face again. And suddenly, her hands began to tremble. "That's not possible," she whispered. I felt tears forming in my own eyes. "I think I'm your daughter." The room went completely still. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Tick, tick, tick. Mira stared at me like someone trying to understand a dream. "She was told my baby died," she said quietly. "I know." Her voice broke. "She held her for only a few minutes." Tears rolled down her cheeks. They said her heart stopped. My father spoke gently. "The hospital discovered there was a switch." Her gaze slowly returned to my face. Her eyes searched every detail, the curve of my smile, the shape of my eyes, and suddenly she started crying harder. "Oh my God," she whispered. Her hands covered her mouth. "I always wondered." She looked at me again. "I always wondered if she would have looked like me." My tears fell freely now. "I guess we finally know." Then something beautiful happened. She stood up slowly, walked towards me, and without saying another word, she wrapped her arms around me. The hug was warm, tight, full of 24 years of missing time, and in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never truly felt before, a mother's love that recognized me instantly. But as powerful as that moment was, the truth that followed would shake our lives even more, because Mira had something else to tell us, something none of us expected, something that would change the story of our family once again.
Mira didn't let go of me for a long time. Her arms stayed wrapped around my shoulders, trembling slightly, as if she was afraid that if she loosened her grip, I might disappear again. I held her just as tightly, not because I fully understood everything that was happening, but because something deep inside me felt calm in her embrace, like a missing piece had quietly slipped back into place. When she finally stepped back, she looked at my face again. Her eyes were red from crying, but they were also shining with something warm, something I had spent my whole childhood searching for: recognition. "You look like my mother," she whispered. I smiled softly through my tears. Everyone always said I looked like my father. She shook her head gently. "No, the eyes are mine." She reached out carefully and touched my cheek, almost like she was afraid it might be an illusion. "I spent years imagining what my daughter might have looked like," she said. "I never thought I would actually see her." My father stood quietly nearby, watching us. I could see guilt written across his face. Finally, he spoke. "Mira, I'm sorry." The room fell silent again. She turned toward him slowly. There was no anger in her eyes, just a long, tired sadness. "I waited for you," she said softly. My father lowered his head. "I know. For months after the hospital told me my baby had died, I thought you would come." Her voice trembled slightly. "I thought maybe you would help me understand what happened." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know how." Mira sighed and sat down again. "Life moved on," she said quietly. "I moved to this neighborhood, started working at a small school, and tried to rebuild my life." She looked at me again. "But I never stopped thinking about that day." Her voice softened. "I kept the blanket they gave me in the hospital." She pointed toward the photograph I had noticed earlier, the pink one. I looked at the picture again, and suddenly it meant so much more. We talked for hours that afternoon, about everything, about the hospital, about the mix-up, about the years we had all lived without knowing the truth. But then Mira said something unexpected. "There's something else you should know." My father looked up. "What?" She hesitated. Then she looked directly at me. "I tried to find answers back then." My heart skipped a beat. "You did?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. After the hospital told me my baby had died, something didn't feel right." Her fingers tightened around the teacup. "So I went back several times. I asked questions." "And?" I asked. "The staff kept insisting there was no mistake." Her eyes grew distant. "But one nurse said something strange before she left." The room grew quiet again. "What did she say?" Mira took a deep breath. "She told me there had been confusion in the maternity ward that night." My father frowned. "What kind of confusion?" "Two babies were born within minutes of each other." I felt a chill run through my body. "That was us," I said. She nodded slowly. "Yes." But then her voice became more serious. "The nurse also said something else." My heart started beating faster again. "What?" "She said there might have been 3 babies in the room." My father froze. "That's impossible." Mira shrugged gently. "That's what she said." My mind spun. 3 babies? She nodded. "Yes." But the hospital records only mentioned 2 births. A strange feeling spread through my chest. What happened to the 3rd one? Mira looked down at her hands. "I never found out." The room felt suddenly colder, because if there truly had been 3 babies that night, then the story we thought we understood might not be the full story at all. My father stood up slowly. "This doesn't make sense." Mira nodded. "I know. But if what that nurse said was true," her voice grew quiet, "then someone changed the records." Arav called me that evening while my father and I were still at Mira's house. "How did it go?" he asked. I looked at the woman sitting across from me, my biological mother. "It was embellishable," I said softly.
But then I added something that surprised even me. And Arav, there might be another part of this story. He sounded confused. What do you mean? I glanced at Mira again. Then I said the words that had been echoing in my mind all afternoon. There might have been another baby born that night. Silence filled the phone. Finally, Arav spoke. So you're saying there could be someone else out there? I looked out the window at the quiet street. The evening sky was turning gold as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. And for the first time, I realized something. The truth about my birth wasn't just complicated. It might be bigger than any of us imagined. Because somewhere,
Some memories feel like faded photographs, soft around the edges, warm in color, but carrying a quiet sadness that you only understand years later. My name is Ananya, and for most of my life, I felt like the extra chair at my own family's table. Not unwanted exactly, just unnecessary. Growing up, there were four of us in our small house: my mother, my father, my younger brother, Arav, and me. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. My father was respected in our neighborhood, my mother was known for her kindness, Arav was charming, loud, and full of life. And me? I was the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background, the one people forgot to ask about. I noticed the difference very early. When Arav was born, I was 6 years old enough to remember how things used to be. Before him, my mother used to brush my hair every morning before school. She would hum soft songs while tying my braids, and sometimes she would kiss the top of my head. "Ananya," she would say, "you are my sunshine." But after Arav arrived, everything changed slowly, like winter creeping into autumn. The songs stopped, the braids became quick and messy, and eventually, even the morning kisses disappeared. Arav became the center of the house. If he laughed, everyone laughed. If he cried, the entire world stopped. If he wanted something, he got it. New toys, better clothes, the bigger bedroom when we moved houses. Meanwhile, I learned something children should never have to learn: how to make myself smaller. I stopped asking for things, stopped complaining, stopped expecting love to come my way. I remember one particular afternoon when I was 9. My school had organized a small art competition. I had spent weeks painting a picture of a sunrise over a lake. The colors were bright and hopeful, and my teacher loved it so much she entered it into the district competition. When the results came, I had won second place in the entire district. I ran home that day, holding the certificate tightly so the wind wouldn't wrinkle it. My heart was pounding with excitement. For once, I thought, maybe today they'll notice me. When I reached home, my mother was sitting in the living room with Arav. He was crying. "What happened?" I asked softly. "Arav didn't make the cricket team," my mother said, her voice full of sympathy. I stood there quietly, my certificate trembling in my hands. "Oh," I said. No one asked about my day. No one noticed the certificate. After a few minutes, my mother looked at me. "Ananya, can you make tea for your brother? He's upset." I remember standing in the kitchen later, staring at the kettle as tears blurred my vision. My certificate stayed folded inside my bag for days. Eventually, I slipped it under my mattress. It wasn't that my parents were cruel. They never yelled at me without reason. They paid for my school, they fed me, clothed me, and made sure I had what I needed. But love, the kind that feels warm and visible, that always seemed reserved for Arav. As we grew older, the gap widened. When Arav turned 16, my parents threw him a huge birthday party. Lights, music, cake, dozens of relatives. When I turned 16 2 years earlier, my birthday had been a quiet dinner at home. My mother had forgotten to buy a cake until the evening. "Next year we'll celebrate properly," she had promised. Next year never came. But despite everything, I loved my brother. Arav wasn't responsible for the favoritism. He had simply grown up in a world where he was adored. Sometimes he would sit in my room late at night and tell me about his dreams, becoming a professional athlete, traveling the world, buying a big house for our parents. And I would smile, because his happiness felt like sunlight in our quiet home. Still, deep inside, there was always a question I never dared to ask. Why? Why did my parents look at him with pride, but at me with something distant, something careful, something that felt almost like guilt? The truth began to unravel the year I turned 24. It started with something small, something ordinary, something that seemed completely unrelated to me. A hospital visit, a routine medical test, and a doctor who frowned at a piece of paper. That was the day everything changed. That was the day the first crack appeared in the story of my family, and none of us were ready for what would come next.